Well, let's unpack that build-up to the budget seat 2016. Joining me here in studio, I have Chris Citadel, Chairman at SECA VAT Subcommittee. I also have Paul Leonard, Regional Head from Citadel, joining us via Skype. We also have Munir Hassan, Senior Lecturer in Taxation at the University of Johannesburg. And also joining us live from Parliament via an OB satellite, we have Mr. Dennis George, the General Secretary of FEDUSA. A very good afternoon to you, gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining us here on Express Lunch as we take you through that build-up of Budget 2016. I'm going to start here in studio with Chris Citadel. Very good afternoon to you, sir. We thank you very much for your time. What are some of the likely expectations that would probably come up, firstly, with regards to tax?
Well, I think you need to distinguish between expectations from a tax perspective and expectations from an economic perspective. From an economic perspective, it's probably more important than from a tax perspective, in the sense that we are looking we are looking for direction. We are looking for, in a sense, hope that we can avoid the junk status, as we know. We're looking at the fiscal policy. Is there guidance in terms of what that fiscal policy might look like? So that's on the one side. On the pure taxes side, we've talked about that. We probably will see a significant increase in these so-called sin taxes. We will probably not see an increase in VAT because of the political attachments to it. We will probably see an increase in individual tax, maybe 1%. If it really gets pushed, it might be 2% at the top level, from the current 41% to maybe 43%, but most likely it will be go up to 42%. You might see a little bit of leeway at the lower levels of tax paying, which is just bracket creep adjustments. We might see some of that. And those are the things we will definitely see. Then there are things that might come our way as surprises. Capital gains tax is one that might well come through as a surprise. VAT on dividends might come through which would be a surprise, but it could be an increase on that. Corporate tax will probably stay the same. So I don't think there will be much of there definitely will not be a change. With corporates, the way they are performing at this stage, this might be an opportunity to reduce the tax. And if there's a real surprise coming through in the budget, that would be reducing the corporate tax rate to something less and attract investment.
Indeed. Mr. Lennon, I'm going to bring you into the conversation here. Do you agree with some of the sentiments there shared by Mr. Turon with regards to some of the expectations?
I was about to say, Christy, you got my speech. So, but you know, my approach to this was what should we rather look out for, and I agree. You know, last year we saw the increase to 41%. Christy, you'll probably remember the days where we had 45% tax rate. So I certainly hope we don't see that kind of territory. But it's interesting because this is an election year as well. So they've got a bit of a balancing act there. So I agree with the thing about VAT. I mean, the largest place where we collect tax in this country is personal income tax, and then secondly is VAT. But there everybody pays. But I think from a political perspective that might be a bit of a tricky one to increase now. So I tend to agree with that.
Indeed. Continue.
Sorry, the sin taxes. The sin taxes is always where there's a laugh in the house. But that's part of the other category of taxes. So they don't. I mean, that's not a massive source of revenue.
We're also joined via OB satellite from Mr. Dennis George, of course, General Secretary from FEDUSA. A very good afternoon to you, sir. We thank you very much for your time. From a Labour and Union perspective, what are some of the hopes coming out of this afternoon's speech?
For us, the most important issue is the issue of economic growth, because the kind of growth that we're experiencing now in the country is not sufficient, especially for our public servants, you know, to go to the employer as government, you know, in terms of the pressures that they are feeling, you know, from the tightness of the economy to get a higher income during the wage negotiations. But I think it's also critical from a country perspective, because government has to give a clear signal that South Africa is ready for business. South Africa is also ready for job creation, because we're sitting with a huge amount of young people that are unemployed, and these people need to find employment in our labor market. And the budget speech is one of the more powerful instruments to deal with those kinds of issues of job creation and inclusive economic growth.
Indeed. I'm going to come back to what this issue that was brought there by Paul Leonard with regards to the reduction of corporate taxes as well as the wasteful expenditure. In having a look at SONA that actually took place not too long, a week ago, many economists, analysts were quite disappointed with the lack of direction, which you also mentioned, Mr. Theron, shared in SONA with regards to wasteful expenditure as well as the economy. Where does South Africa go now? It seems as specifically with regards to the deep slump that we see ourselves in. Yes. Well, it doesn't seem Mr. Leonard can hear me. I'll pose that question to you as soon as we can get audio back. Where do you think President Zuma, as well as the Finance Ministry, needs to take us in being able to ensure and give that assurance to South Africa with regards to our current political and economic climate?
I think the challenge is legitimacy. That's the big challenge. I think and it's a pity that the President has made the comments around Mr. The status and the competency of Mr. Gordon earlier this week. And that again creates an impression that they're not pulling as a team. That is a challenge, and I think that needs to be corrected today and the records need to be set straight. I think what the economy and economists and the rating agencies are looking at, they're looking for a clear decision and implementation thereof, not merely words. Because I think we passed the stage where words do not become activity. So as far as the wasteful expenditure and all of that's concerned, that's just processes within the procurement cycles that's not being adhered to. And I think people like Tuli Madonsela, she really does great work in this area, but she now needs to get the recognition for what she does, and you want to see something happening. We've seen the Post Office report coming out yesterday or the day before. You would want to see something concrete following that, as opposed to a prolonged process. So I think it's, in terms of this specific budget, we're looking at two things. On the one side, you're looking at the funding of the budget by additional taxes, but there's limited scope. So the real funding will come through savings and through redirection of funds. And to answer your question, I think that the challenge is if the statements need to be bold, they need to be clear, and they need to be supported by a political will to implement. And that's what people are going to look for in the speech.
Indeed. Mr. Leonard, if you can hear me, I think the audio it was a bit intermitted earlier on. I posed the question with regards to the SONA speech that had taken place. So many disappointment there coming from economists as well as ordinary South Africans on the ground, saying possibly the president didn't give enough assurance in acknowledging, number one, that we do have, or rather the economic climate we find ourselves in, and number two, moving away forward through that. And secondly, I'd also like you to go back onto that issue with regards to the tax hike that we have. It is an election year, it is a poll year. Does that give government enough room for a tax hike?
Well, just I agree once again with what Chris just said. When it comes to leadership, you need decisive leadership. You need direction. It's I think what I did like about the SONA speech was that there was at least an intention or an intent expressed that we want to make South Africa more business friendly. With regard to reducing red tape and that sort of thing. Now it's going to be to see what actually comes out of it, what sort of leadership and action comes out of that. And we do need decisive leadership. Look, on the tax, but we know that the largest source of tax revenue, of course, is personal income tax. So it wouldn't be surprising to see an increase there. And last year, I mean, it was the upper end of the marginal rates which was raised. So once again, it's the middle and upper income earners that bear the brunt of it. In fact, I mean, if you break down the statistics from where the tax is collected, it's disproportionately weighted toward the higher income earners. And I think I wouldn't be surprised. I think that's one thing we must look out for. But something else I'd like to mention, Sean, is, my colleagues and I at Citadel often encourage people to focus on what you can control. While all of this is very interesting and affects us either individually, it doesn't affect most of us directly, unless it's something like that. And there's not much that we can do about change in tax rates or inflation or exchange control. But we certainly want to encourage people to listen to this and then to adjust what we can, in our personal circumstances, because you can't control the wind, but you can adjust the sails. So I think, and my expertise lies in personal financial planning. So I always look at this from, well, what does it mean to me? What does it mean to you, Shante? And we must change any of your financial plans tomorrow as a consequence of the announcements made today. And I'd encourage people to think about or to try and get an interpretation of that from what it means from them to them from a personal perspective. And is there something that they need to do? Do they need to adjust their own sails?
Definitely. Now, Mr. George, Dennis, take us through the communication channels and the infrastructure that unions would like to see be better conducive with regards to being interactive between what's taking place in the economy with regards to workers on ground level routes.
Yeah, look, FEDUSA is part of the structure of NETLAC, where government, labor, and business meet on a regular basis to discuss how can we get our economy to grow at a higher rate. And the importance of that is when your economy grows on a higher rate, then you also have this kind of a bonus that you will have more taxpayers that will contribute towards the fiscus. And the higher the economy grows, more people spend money. And then your VAT increases will also go, and firms become more profitable, and therefore their contribution to corporate tax is also much better. And therefore for us the focus is, that government has to sit down with labor and with business to see that we can get all our systems to work in the same directions. Secondly, we must address the structural reforms on our economy. We must look at what incentive measures we can create for job creation. And so there's a wide variety of leverages and policy instruments that can be at least, to make sure that we get our economy to recover, to get our economy to grow faster. And that is something important for FEDUSA.
Indeed. Mr. Theron, we've been focusing on tax, we've been focusing on the economy and with regards to some of the expectations and the hopes that ordinary South Africans would like to see coming from there. But another issue, more of a social issue, but it is quite fundamental, is that of the hashtag Fees Must Fall campaign. We also saw at one point that it actually brought Parliament to an absolute standstill in having President Jacob Zuma be in Parliament and have students protesting outside, of course, wanting not to have an increment for this year, which they didn't get. But take us through what we could possibly expect with regards to budget allocation from the ministry with regards to education, higher education specifically.
It's a huge challenge. I think the Fees Must Fall, the hashtag Fees Must Fall campaign has set a trend. So I'll be very surprised if next year there's even a question of further increases. So I think the benchmark has been set. The other challenge is it's not an increase must fall, it's fees must fall. So I think there's an expectation of a complete free education system. Now, government is working on what might be a model that works. We haven't seen anything particularly in that space or something that's been communicated. But the reality is government should prepare itself for funding the entire cost of education within the next few years, maybe in a phased approach, and that money must come from somewhere. The first question is, how do we get the money for the Fees Must Fall increment for this year? And that in itself, what was the number? 8 billion or something. It was a big number. Might even be more. That needs to be funded, and that needs to be addressed in this specific budget speech, because that money must be paid this year. The other issue is, but what happens going forward? And that's the bigger issue. And I think the minister will allude to that in terms of processes that's and discussions that's been going on. I'll be very surprised if he indicates how exactly it will work. But there needs to be a very, very significant source of revenue to fund free education. But it certainly is moving towards that.
Definitely. There certainly is. We also joined now by live satellite Senior Lecturer in Taxation, University of Johannesburg, Mr. Munir Hassan. A very good afternoon to you. We thank you very much for your time. Of course, I was just speaking to Chris Theron. He is here in studio with us with regards to Fees Must Fall, if possibly some of the expectations one could allude to with regards to budget allocation. In actually being a university lecturer and having and hearing some of the plight of the students, take us through some of the importance specifically with regards to budget allocation for funds this year and that it needs to be mentioned.
Yeah, I think Chantal, and definitely if we look at a budget and the way a budget is structured, it looks at allocating funds to different areas in terms of importance, and it also from a policy point of view, they would basically look at allocating funding to a higher priority items over other issues. Now, obviously, with the universities in the fore and in the public domain in the past couple of months and in the past weeks as well, we've seen increasing pressures from students as well. Obviously, we'd like to see some kind of comment coming through in terms of budget allocations and getting some kind of certainty, particularly from a university point of view. That would obviously give us some kind of structure in terms of how to look at the future in terms of a better funding model, in terms of different funding models that could be explored as well.
Now, gentlemen, I am joined by an ANN7 reporter, Ramapu Mahu. We are continuing trying to get those actions from ordinary South Africans as to what they would like to come be addressed in this afternoon's budget speech. I'm going to cross over to you now, Ramapu. Where exactly are you? Take us through some of the plight of the individuals in your location.
Well, good afternoon, Shante. I'm here at the Tshwane University of Technology in Pretoria, and as you have already indicated, the Minister of Finance, Pravin Gordhan, will be delivering his first budget speech. And among other things that have, of course, been central to this particular budget speech, which has been deemed to be one of the most important since the dawn of democracy in 1994, particularly looking at the state of the economy at this point. The rand has not been doing well for quite some time, and many people have been saying government has got to take a number of steps to deal with some of these issues. But of course, with regard to education, the South African education system, in particular the South African higher education system, has been in dire situation, and some of the problems have been related to the fact that there's been issues of money and allocation of financial aid. But of course, I'm joined by a number of student leaders and members of the South African Student Congress, and of course we just want to know in this case, what are the things that you want Mr. Gordhan to address in this regard?
First of all, in our campus we have a problem. A lot of students didn't register because they are owing the university. The university says if you are owing 50,000, they said you must pay half of it, which is 50%. How can I get 50%? How can I get 25,000? My parents don't work. We are poor. We are from poor backgrounds, so we have big problems in our campus. That's it.
All right. Well, there you have it, Shanti. Some of them saying that they want the minister to address some of money relating to registration and so forth. But let's move on to you. What is it that you are looking forward to?
Now I'm looking the minister to increase at least amount in that one of NSFAS. In fact, yeah, I can say okay. Last year, a student they did apply for NSFAS, but they were not given a chance. In fact, they didn't evaluate their application due to some other reasons. Some they were not having courses, but currently they are having courses, and they are also the status says it's unsuccessful. I need the Minister of Finance on his budget to touch at least issues of finances, especially in TUT as a whole. I cannot say TUT Soshanguve because maybe in Bombela, Polokwane also they are facing the same crisis. That's what I want the minister to address in his budget speech today.
Thank you very much. Well, Shanti, there you have it. Most of them saying that they want the NSFAS to be given specific attention, particularly with regard to the money, the amount of money that is allocated for students in the country. But of course, it doesn't end there. We have another student here. Sir, we do know that the NSFAS board has indicated that we have a lot of former students that were financed by NSFAS who are not paying back the money, and that is why NSFAS doesn't have enough money to sponsor some of you guys. What do you have to say with regard to that? Isn't that a problem?
That also add on that, but then we can't say that that is an issue of that some children don't have money to pay their fees, because those ones we already have studied here. That government must look at other strategies which it can use in order for those who have already been funded and finished courses so that they can pay back the money. But that is not an issue for now. An issue is that the government, specifically the minister, must just come and address us so that we must know on that the amount which must be injected must be not less more to that which you are expecting.
All right. Thank you very much. Well, Shante, there you have it. Most of them are saying that they want more money to be given to the higher education department, in particular the ANN7, in order to be able to deal with some of the financial issues that the universities have been facing in recent years. But among other things, before I leave you, Shante, you will remember that during the Fees Must Fall, President Jacob Zuma did indicate that there was going to be 0% increase, which means that there's not going to be any increase, and the financial shortfall was going to be covered by government. You know, the money that government will have to pay in this case is said to be around 2-point-something billion, and in that case, that is some of the money that will have to come from the government side. But of course, that is where we're standing with regard to what is it that the students are looking for from the finance minister's speech.
Indeed. Thank you very much for that. Ramad Mehu on the ground. They're getting some of the expectations coming from students. I'm going to cross back to our Skype guest, Mr. Paul Leonard. Some of your closing arguments with regards to the discussion that we've briefly had.
Well, arguments. I think, as I said, I think we as individuals need to focus on the things that we do need to control. We do certainly hope that the minister is going to give us some more news, showing us that we are going to be friendly for business. And one of the something I didn't mention, Shante, I'm really interested to see if there's going to be any other further announcement about the government, the state pension.
Yes.
It'll be interesting to watch for that, because that's needed. But with the shortfalls that we have right now, it'll be interesting to see if there's any comment about that.
Definitely. Yourself, Mr. Munir Hassan, any other closing arguments or expectations that you would like to see come to a close?
I think the interesting point about the budget speech this afternoon is going to see where the increases in taxes are going to come from. In essence, there are basically 4 contributors to the tax pot, and it's in that priority of importance. It's basically personal income tax, and then we basically have VAT coming in second, and then company tax, and then we get the other sort of smaller taxes. So it would be quite interesting to see, in order to fund all these initiatives and to play this balancing act, where is this increase going to come from? Is it going to come in the form of personal income tax, where we've always gone to in the past? Are we going to actually look at VAT this afternoon? Or where's the funding actually going to come? Because we've got a whole lot of initiatives. We have a whole lot of spending that we can't curb, because if we curb it too much, it's going to affect the growth of the country as well, which we can't have that happen. So it's in quite a tight position and spot in terms of trying to get the funding from a tax collections, and then balancing that in terms of allocating that to the correct priority items in terms of allocation spend.
Indeed. I'm going to roll over the ball to Chris Tuteron here with us in studio. Some of your views.
Yes, I can just tell you, I'm glad I'm not the minister. You can see the expectations versus the resources that's available. The gap is just enormous. So what I would love to see is the minister coming with a real strategic approach to this. There are certain priorities, and money has to go towards those priorities for the right reasons. If you get there, I think you're halfway won. But it is an extremely difficult balancing act that they'll have to do.
It definitely, specifically having to pick up all those pieces there with regards to that and getting the ball rolling. Thank you very much for our guests that have joined us. Of course, Mr. Paul Leonard joining us via Skype there from regional, or rather from Citadel, the regional head there. We also had Mr. Munir Hassan, senior lecturer in taxation at the University of Johannesburg. Also joining us via OB Live, we had Dennis George, the General Secretary and producer. We also had our ANN7 reporter, Ramad Mehu, on the ground. And of course, here with me in studio, Chris Tuteron, Chairman at SECA VAT Subcommittee. We thank you very much, gentlemen, for your time. On that note, it is time to cut for a short break here on Express Lunch. Do stay tuned.